There are things a man can make his peace with. Deployments that run long. Missed holidays. Relationships that drift while you're gone and have to be rebuilt from scratch when you come back. I've made peace with a lot of things over the years. But there is one particular thing, one moment. One decision my wife made while I was 7 months into a National Guard deployment in the Middle East that I have never been able to reason my way around. No matter how many quiet hours I've spent trying. Not out of spite. Not because I'm someone who holds grudges like currency. But because once you see something clearly, truly, fully clearly, there is no pretending you haven't. My name is Daniel Croft. I'm 41 years old. And I'm going to tell you exactly what I came home to. And exactly what I did about it. I had been back on American soil for 3 hours when I found myself sitting in the back seat of my father's 2001 Chevy Silverado in the parking lot of a Home Depot off Route 9 inches Central New Jersey, holding my mother while she cried into my shoulder without making a single sound. Not the homecoming I had planned. For 7 months I'd been overseas. Heat. Dust. Rotating 12-hour shifts. Satellite phone calls that dropped mid-sentence at the exact moments they mattered most. I had a clear picture in my head of what returning home would look like: my wife Claire at the front door. A hot meal on the stove. My own bed. The particular weight of silence that only your own house has at 2 in the morning. Instead, I was in a parking lot. The fluorescent lights above the entrance buzzed and flickered. A shopping cart drifted slowly across the asphalt and bumped against a concrete divider and stopped. How does a man begin to absorb something like this? My father, Hank Croft, 76 years old, spent 32 years as a union electrician. His hands are thick and scarred in the specific way that comes from decades of actual work. And he was sitting completely upright in the driver's seat, staring at the middle distance, to the way he does when he's working through something he hasn't figured out yet. My mother, Barbara Tishri, had been asleep against the passenger window until I opened the rear door and climbed in. On the dashboard, tucked against the base of the windshield, was a framed photograph, slightly warped at the corner. The glass cracked across one edge. My sister Renee, 26, when a wrong-way driver took her on the parkway on a wet November morning 6 years ago. She was coming back from a weekend visiting a friend at Rutgers. She had just been accepted to physical therapy school. I carry a copy of that same photograph in the front pocket of my uniform, folded and worn at the creases, over my chest. My parents had owned their home on Millbrook Lane in Westfield for 34 years. Same house, same porch, same 2 oak trees in the front yard that were saplings in their wedding photos and now shade the whole front half of the yard in summer. On an ordinary Thursday night, while I was 7,000 miles away and halfway through a deployment, the house stopped being theirs. Electrical fire started inside the wall cavity between the kitchen and the dining room. By the time the smoke alarm went off, the back half of the structure was already fully involved. My father woke to an orange glow under the bedroom door and smoke curling in along the floor. He got my mother up. He got her out. They stood on the front lawn in their sleepwear and watched 34 years of their life burn. They got out with their car, the clothes on their backs, and one thing, my mother, on the way down the hallway, her hand found Renee's photograph on the wall. She didn't decide to take it. Her hands simply knew. They moved without instruction, the way a mother's hands sometimes do, reaching for the one thing they could not leave inside. She made it to the yard. She looked down. Renee's face looked back up at her through cracked glass. Smoke-warm frame. Safe. I will carry that detail for the rest of my life. They had homeowners insurance, but they had fallen behind on payments during a rough stretch 2 years prior and had privately lapsed without telling anyone. My father is not a man who asks for help. He is, at his core, a man who provides it. And the gap between those two positions had always been too wide for him to cross comfortably. But that night, standing in a stranger's yard, while firefighters worked and neighbors gathered in robes and yard shoes, he and my mother had one place to go. My house. They called Claire on the drive over. No answer. Called again at the next red light. Nothing. A third time. Silence. They pulled into our driveway anyway, because there was nowhere else to go. And my parents are not people who simply pull over and stop. My mother knocked. The porch light came on. Claire opened the door. My mother. Even then, even standing there in a smoke-smelling, oversized t-shirt and my father's old slippers with singed hems, managed to hold herself together. That's who Barbara Croft is. She said, Claire, honey, there's been a fire. We lost everything. We're not asking to move in, we just need a few nights. Just until we can figure something out. My father stood half a step behind her, hat in hand. The literal posture of a man setting aside everything he is to ask for one thing he needs. He said, quietly, just tonight, Claire, we'll be out of your hair. Claire told them the house wasn't set up for guests. She said she needed her routine, her space, and that she couldn't have that disrupted right now. She said it politely, carefully, with the measured calm of someone who has already decided and is simply delivering the information. Then she closed the door. My father put his hand on my mother's back and walked her to the truck. He drove to the Home Depot off Route 9 because the parking lot was well lit and the all-night diner across the street had a bathroom they could use in the morning. They slept there that night, and the night after, and for 15 nights, total 2 full weeks, and change, while my wife went about her life undisturbed, 20 minutes away, in a 3-bedroom house with a guest room that had never hosted a single guest in 5 years of marriage. I landed at Newark Liberty on a Sunday afternoon, bone-tired in the specific AWAS. Hollowed-out way, a deployment makes you tired, which is different from ordinary fatigue in ways that are hard to explain to someone who hasn't felt it. But I was home. I was thinking about real coffee, about sleeping in a real bed. Flat, horizontal, like a human person. I called Claire. She said she was home and couldn't wait to see me. Then I tried my mother. No answer. I tried my father. He picked up on the 5th ring. Hey, Danny. 2 words. That's all it took. I have known my father's voice for 41 years. I know every register of it, the proud version, the worried version, the one he uses when he's trying not to show you something, underneath the steadiness, underneath the careful level tone. I heard everything he hadn't said yet. Dad, what's wrong? It wasn't a question. He knew that. He told me about the fire. He told it the way men of his generation tell hard things methodically, plainly, with the affect stripped out, like reading incident notes. Like distance will make it easier to hear. He told me about the smoke, about the drive over, about knocking on the door. He told me, with a pause before it that lasted just long enough that I already knew what was coming, that Claire had said it wasn't a good time. I was standing at baggage claim. My duffel was at my feet. People moved around me with carts and rolling bags, and the particular distracted energy of people who have somewhere to be. A child in a yellow jacket was pulling on her grandmother's sleeve. The carousel turned. Dad. My voice was very quiet. Where are you right now? Home Depot. Of Fruit Neff. Stay there. I didn't call Claire. I didn't text her. I picked up my bag and walked to the rental car desk and drove directly to that parking lot. My father was exactly where I expected him to be, upright, hands on his thighs, staring forward. My mother was asleep against the passenger window, her hands folded in her lap. Renee's photograph on the dashboard between them. Cracked glass, facing forward. like she was keeping an eye on things. I opened the rear door and sat down. I reached forward and put my hand on my father's shoulder from behind. He reached up without turning around and covered my hand with both of his. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. My mother woke slowly. She turned. She saw me tired. Bags under my eyes. Still in my travel clothes. Come straight from the airport, and she covered her mouth with both hands. Her shoulders shook. And she didn't make a sound. Which, if you've ever seen it, you know is the hardest version of crying to witness. I held my mother in that parking lot. I thought Claire did this. Claire put my mother here. I had been home for less than 3 hours. I drove to the house. Claire was on the couch when I walked in. Feet tucked under her. Phone in hand. She looked up and smiled, actually smiled, and said, "Hey, you're home. I thought you weren't landing until later." I stood in the doorway of my own house, and I said, very quietly, "Where are my parents sleeping tonight?" Claire. The smile shifted. "Steve, where have they been sleeping for the last 2 weeks?" She set her phone down. She uncrossed her legs and set her feet on the floor. She crossed her arms. And then she did the thing I was not prepared for. She didn't apologize. She didn't even flinch. She explained, "Danny, I can't have people just show up and move into this house without a conversation first. I need my space. I need my routine. I work from home. You know how hard that is. I'm not built to be a caretaker. 1 night becomes 3 nights, becomes a month. That's how it always goes. I didn't cause the fire. No. You just left 2 people who had nothing in a parking lot." She looked at the wall, looked back at me, and then, in the same level tone, she said the sentence that ended our marriage. Even if the paperwork took another few weeks to catch up, they've had their lives. Danny, I can't be responsible for other people's problems. They're not my parents. I looked at her for a long moment. The woman who had eaten my mother's pot roast at our table more times than I could count. The woman my father used to walk to her car every single time she visited, waiting at the door until her taillights turned the corner. Because that's just who Hankcroft is. The woman who had received a hand-embroidered throw that my mother spent 4 months making while watching evening television, and who had said, "Oh, that's lovely," and put it in a closet where it still sat. Folded. Tags still attached. They're not my parents. I went back to the parking lot. I helped my mother and father collect everything they owned in the world. It fit in 2 reusable grocery bags and the back seat of the truck. I drove them to my house. I set up the guest room, the one with the clean linen, the good lamp, the blackout curtains we bought for a house guest who never came. I made soup from the recipe my mother taught me when I was 10 chicken. White beans. Rosemary. The kind of thing that takes 45 minutes and tastes like the part of childhood that stays warm. I told them to make themselves at home. The next 2 weeks in that house were unlike anything I'd experienced, and I say that as someone who has spent time in active conflict zones. Claire did not yell. She did not storm. She operated with a particular brand of cold precision that was, in some ways, more exhausting than open confrontation. She made my parents feel the texture of their own presence, constantly, not through cruelty exactly, but through the elaborate maintenance of a discomfort that was always, somehow, their fault. A dish left to dry on the wrong side of the rack. A comment about noise levels in the morning. A closed door that didn't need to be closed except to signal that it was closed. My mother, who had spent her whole life being the person who makes others feel at home, was apologizing for things that required no apology. She was tiptoeing. She was trying to be invisible. Hankcroft had spent his life providing for other people. He had never owed anyone an apology for existing, and he sat in my living room on a Tuesday morning reading the newspaper with his hands folded in his lap, and I could see in the set of his jaw that this was costing him something he didn't have a reserve of. I had the conversation with Claire on a Thursday evening. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger is a kind of energy, and I'd used mine up. What I had left was something quieter and more final. I sat across from her at the kitchen table. I'm not asking you to have been perfect. I said, I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. But Claire, my parents loved you. Not because they had to. Not because I asked them to. Because they chose to. The same way they choose everything. Which is without conditions, and without keeping a running total. And when they had nothing, when they were standing at our door with the clothes they'd escaped in, and my dead sister's photograph and nowhere to go, you closed the door. She started to say something. I've spent a lot of time trying to find the version of this where I move forward. I said, I've looked. It isn't there. Not because I can't forgive the choice, but because the choice told me something I can't unknow. I know what it means, and I'm not able to pretend I don't. So you're choosing them. Her voice was flat. But it's easy. Over your wife. Over your marriage. Yeah. I said, I am. You'll regret this. Maybe. But not for the reason you think. I looked at her for what I already knew was the last real time. You should have just opened the door. Claire. That's the whole of it. There was one moment. One door. And you closed it. Everything after that is just what happened because of that one thing. I filed for divorce 19 days later. I found my parents a rental, 2 towns over, single story. Wide front porch. A good-sized backyard with afternoon sun. Not large. Not fancy. The kind of house that becomes a home in about a week when the right people live in it. I paid the deposit and the first 3 months without discussion. Because sometimes choosing your people has a dollar amount attached to it. And you pay it without counting. My mother planted marigolds along the back fence within the first 2 weeks. The same way she'd always done at Millbrook Lane. My father, within the month, had identified 3 neighbors with mechanical problems and was spending his Saturdays in their driveways. On a Sunday afternoon, about 6 weeks in, I helped him hang Renee's photograph above the fireplace in the front room. New frame, clean. Simple oak. We'd retired the cracked one. Though my mother placed it carefully in the top drawer of her nightstand rather than let it go. I didn't say anything about that. I understood. Dad stood back with his hands in his pockets, looking at the photograph for a long, quiet moment, and said, There she is. There she is. I said. The afternoon light came through the bay window at the exact right angle and caught the photograph in a way that almost stopped my breath. She looked luminous up there, present, like she'd just been waiting for us to find the right wall. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday. I drove to my new apartment and sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going inside. Was I grieving? Yes. Parts of that marriage I mourned, the early parts. The version of us that existed before I understood who she actually was when it mattered. But did I regret it? I thought about my father's hands covering mine in the dark of that parking lot. I thought about my mother crying silently into my shoulder. Shoulders shaking, making no sound. No, I did not regret it. I started going to my parents' house, most evenings. Real food. My mother's kitchen. Then my father and I on the porch with our coffee, watching the sky go through its changes. There's a particular quality to the light in that part of New Jersey. In late afternoon, it gets amber first, then a deep orange, and finally, on the best evenings, the whole western sky turns a color that has no real name and stays that way for just long enough to feel like a gift. About 10 weeks after the divorce, my father and I were on that porch on a Friday evening, coffee in hand, not saying much. We've always been comfortable with quiet, the two of us. Then he said, out of nowhere, with the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth, You know your sister would have made considerably more noise about all of this than you did. I laughed real, full. unguarded, the kind that surprises you. She'd have shown up at that parking lot with a camera and a sign. I said, multiple signs. Dad said, in her best handwriting, laminated. Oh, absolutely. She never did anything at half speed. Dad chuckled, low and quiet, and shook his head slowly. We sat there for a while, smiling at the same person, at the same memory, at the same enormous absence that still takes up space in every room we're ever in together. Through the screen door, I could hear my mother in the kitchen, humming something tuneless and content. The smell of what she was cooking drifted out onto the porch and mixed with the evening air and the faint green smell of the garden she was building along the back fence. I leaned back in my chair. I'm 41 years old. My marriage is over. My sister has been gone for 6 years. And there isn't a single day that doesn't contain at least one moment of missing her. My parents rebuilt from nothing and now live in a house with a porch and a garden that is, honestly, the best one on the street. I have lost things that don't come back. That's just true. And there's no arrangement of words that makes it less true. But some losses, you carry them long enough, and they get lighter. Not gone, just lighter. And on this porch, in this light, with my father in the chair beside me, and my mother's voice coming through the screen door, I know exactly who I am. I know what I chose when it mattered. And I would choose it again before the question finished, leaving your mouth. Here's what I want you to hold on to from this story. When that fire happened, Claire had one moment, one door, two people who had loved her genuinely, consistently, without conditions, or keeping score standing on the other side of it. And she closed it. That's the whole story. Everything else, the divorce, the new house, the marigolds, the porch, the coffee, all of it is just what happened. Because of that one closed door, your parents will not always be strong. There will come a night, maybe it already has, when they need you to hold something together that they can't hold themselves. When they call and their voice is too careful and they're standing somewhere they never imagined standing. And in that moment, you're going to find out something true about yourself that you cannot prepare for and cannot take back. I found out something true about my wife in that moment. And I found out something true about myself. I hope, when your moment comes, you already know which one you want to be.